Hello, folks. Welcome back to the Catholic OCD Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Nolfi. Today, we are joined in the studio once more with Joe Carrabbia, and we are going to talk about the vices that we can go, sin-lead vices that we can wrestle with, and how they can be cured and battled against with virtue. Stay tuned. This is the Catholic OCD Podcast. All right. I want to thank you guys for joining this show. Today, the reason I want to talk about this as an important thing is because I want to talk about the biblical understanding of mortal sin. And I want to especially take this from the context of the epistle of James. And I think that what ends up happening is we have this understanding today that you'll hear people say, like, well, sin is sin. And don't judge me because I sin differently than you. So I want to kind of talk about very quickly how sin, is all sin sin? And if all sin is sin, then does that mean all sin is equal? So one of the areas where we get this idea of sin is sin, when people are saying this and people tell me like, well, doesn't the Bible say that sin is sin? Well, one of these things comes from James. And in James's context here, he is talking about Christians who are not operating through the virtue of charity. They don't have the love of God operating through them. So they treat different people differently based on, maybe their status or how much money they have. They might say, oh, you're rich, you're the mayor, you sit here. You're a nobody, you sit over there. In this aspect, James is making the point that if we break one part of the law, we're guilty of breaking the whole law. Remember, in the Jewish context of salvation through the law, it would be the understanding that you could almost climb this chain made up of 613 links up to heaven for salvation. So can you be saved by obeying the law? And of course, we know the answer is no. And James is making this point by saying, if you broke one link in the chain, if you're climbing up the chain of law and you break one link, then you're guilty of breaking the whole law. So in that aspect, all sin is sin. If you litter, it's a sin. If you murder somebody, it's a sin. But this does not mean that how this sin affects our life in Christ and Christ in us. It doesn't mean that all sins are equal. Littering is not going to damage the life of Christ in you in the same way that murder is. But what we're going to try to do here is make the argument that sin just doesn't pop out of nowhere. And what I'm saying by this is our sin is something that it starts with us. Okay, so in James, this is in chapter 1, verse 13, James says this: no one experiencing temptation should say, I am being tempted by God. For God is not subject to temptation to evil, and he himself tempts no one. So if you're going through temptation, don't be like, God's really tempting me now. He wants me to watch this bad movie. God's not tempting you to watch the bad movie. He doesn't tempt anybody to do evil. Rather, James says, each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. So when we are lured by our own desire, and then desire conceives and brings forth sin, and when sin reaches maturity, it gives birth to death. James here is talking about this process here. And first thing I want to say is, like, how would you say, Joe, this relates, this idea of sin beginning in the heart. How would you relate this to Jesus' message on the Sermon on the Mount?
Well, I mean, we have basically God is. I wasn't prepared for that question.
I got you. Well, so
wasn't. I didn't think that was the direction you were going, and now I had it in my head the way I was gonna.
All right, follow me here. Follow me here, okay? So Jesus basically.
No.
James is saying
here. Yeah.
James is saying.
Yeah.
That when we're tempted,
I got it.
It's our own desire that begins, and then we can feed this desire, and when we feed this desire, it gives birth to sin, and then we keep feeding that sin, it gives birth to death. So even Jesus talking about the idea of like, where does adultery begin?
What is it? The law of what's the distinction? I'm having kind of a brain fart here. The spirit of the law, right?
Yes.
That's what I was looking for. Yes. So, like, there is this idea where, okay, we go through the 10 Commandments, right? Right. And you could say, okay, I follow all of the first 3 commandments deal with our relationship with God. It's the vertical dimension, right? And then the rest of the commandments are the horizontal dimension, right? So I could say,
love of neighbor.
Yeah. Love of God, vertical, love of neighbor. Christ sums it up that way, right? But that's really what kind of is going on there. You have this vertical and horizontal dimension. I could say, listen, I didn't, you should not commit adultery, right? I didn't cheat on my wife, but, I look at pornography every day. I go to strip clubs with my buddies sometimes. I lust after everybody that I see, every girl that I see, right? But I didn't commit adultery, And so, yes, there's this rule that we follow, that the commandments kind of lay out for you. But Christ calls you to like a deeper reality of what he's talking about, of what that law is meant. That law is a pedagogy, right? Right?
Yeah.
Somebody
a teaching.
That teaches, right? It's there, you tell your kid, don't touch that, Billy. It's hot. And then you slap their hand. It's kind of like you're teaching them kind of these fundamental rules, but there's supposed to be a maturity that grows in your spiritual life where it's no longer like, oh, all right, I didn't do that rule. I didn't break that law. I didn't break that commandment, right? I'm good, but but really you're not, because the way you kind of like manifest everything in your soul towards, that topic in particular, you obviously haven't taken it to heart, right?
And that's really what this is it's an internal thing.
Correct,
Jesus is kind of saying it's
it's
not what goes into your mouth that makes you cleaner.
It's
what comes out of the mouth,
Correct.
because what comes out of the mouth comes out of the
and
heart.
it's like, I joke, it's to the pure all things are pure, to the impure nothing is pure, right? So there is this level of that when we consume ourselves in certain sins or certain ways of thinking, it's going to have an effect on us.
Yeah.
Eventually, right?
It's going to make its way out
Correct.
of you. So I do want to say this. So many of you guys might not know, me and Joe met, we were 12 years old, kind of became best friends since then, a lot in common. So before the show, I say, let's talk about this stuff. That's what we do. We talk about what we're going to talk about, So then I wait till I get on the air. Then I like to bring up a totally different question. And I like catching you off guard there.
Yeah. No, I just wasn't ready for us to start talking about the Beatitudes, which actually it goes together, but just my head was not.
But I did
in
like
that place.
I did like though how when you talked about like, but I didn't have an affair. I kind of like how you did it with that Coming to America.
Correct.
In the barber shop.
Yeah.
So, anyways, enough with all these shenanigans.
But John talks about how there's a sin unto death and there's a sin not unto death, right? But there's still sins, even though there's sin not unto death, right? And that sin can have an effect on you. It can kind of build up,
And that's why he says we should, the sins that don't lead to death, we should pray for.
Yeah.
But now when he talks about, because John's kind of vague on this.
Correct.
Like now when he talks about, but then there is the sin that leads to death, he says, I tell you, you shouldn't pray. And I don't want to write anymore. and then he quits writing. But if you take the Gospel of John 20 and I think Matthew 16, Matthew 18, now you kind of see this whole idea of like confession, which James then is also going to talk about, James 5. Right. But so speaking of the sins that begin in the heart, let's go through, the church basically describes these 7 deadly sins, but then there's like an antidote or there's a virtue that battles against these sins. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go one by one, name the sin, and then the specific virtue that that battles and helps us against this deadly sin. So the first sin is literally the first sin, which is what?
Pride.
Pride. No. So even in heaven, Satan, because of his pride, is like, I want people to worship me. I'm good looking, and that's pride. It's easy. You could see it's easy to do. I mean, I wake up every day, I comb my hair, I look at my hair.
Yeah.
And it's if I wasn't a good Catholic man, I would be filled with pride.
Yeah.
And, want my children just to worship me because of this John Stamos hair. But I can't.
Actually, Brooke told me that you texted her when you came over my house the other day. Tell your mom not to worry.
Yeah.
If she sees somebody look like John Stamos.
So
obviously, of course, you don't have any pride,
Somebody listening to it would be like, what the heck are you talking about? So Joe is like me. He has 5 kids. I have 4 kids. His garbage disposal broke. So Joe did not want to bug me. So his wife texts my wife for my number. She's like, Joe said, don't bother Nikki. So anyways, I went over there to change his garbage disposal. Mm-hmm. Brooke's mom watches the kids. So she said, just let me know what time you're coming over. I just made the joke. Just let your mom know. Don't be scared when a guy shows up. But
the funny thing about that is I fixed it the first time, but then Brooke forgot that I fixed it and thought that it was like something that like we had to do. But it was when I fixed it, it never worked. Like I fixed it and it was leaking. So I'm like, I ain't fixing this again. And we just had like a bucket under there and it just leaking. And she's like, will you get this fixed?
So you send me. Oh, that's nice. Send me to do the dirty work. Well, I did it. You know why? Because I'm filled with humility, which is the virtue that battles against pride. So obviously pride could be the self-centered focus.
I think you're filled with generosity because you're not charging me for that.
Well, you had to come into the studio. That's your payment. So pride, you can really see pride. How does pride really damn us? Because you can't need Jesus as a savior unless you realize that you need him as a savior.
Yeah. There's levels of that. There's dimensions to pride, right? So the tradition is that pride was the sin of Satan, right? And from tradition, the view is that the angels had a testing of their will. God showed them that the angels are a higher being than us, that he was going to become a lesser being than us and elevate that being to worship and to the status of God, a higher being than Satan. And kind of like the idea is that Satan says, like, because Satan speaks Latin, he says, non serve, I will not serve, right? And then the idea is that Michael, the archangel, says, his name symbolizes the idea of like who is like unto God. And I think what you have there is that in that embodiment of that battle of pride and humility, right? So pride is that I will not serve. I will not bend my knee, right? I don't conform to God's image and likeness. God conforms to my image and likeness, right? It's this excessive love of self, but it's also like a delusional, it can have this social dynamic that's a delusional analysis of self, right? We all have this image of ourselves in our mind, right? And the prideful person has this image of himself, but it's a fake image of himself. It's not an image that's in core with reality. Right, and he has to do what he has to do to like pass off this phony image of himself. So there's a couple layers there with pride, where humility is like comes from the word that means earth, where you are grounded. You know the truth of yourself, and you know the truth of the reality around you. I always talk to my students like, the prideful person is like, hey, like, I'm not very good at math, but I'm going to cheat, right, to get the A. And then I'm going to go, look, Mom and Dad, look how great I am at math, right? And you pass this fake image of yourself off. And then you kind of get caught up in this thing where you have to like kind of keep perpetuating this image that isn't really actually who you are. And you want everybody to love that image. So that's one dimension. The other dimension is obviously turning yourself into God, right? Humility kind of fights at that, and kind of is, there's kind of a spiritual idea where you really can't be humble unless you actually deal in humiliation, right? Humiliation actually kind of roots out pride. It roots out ego. On some level where you kind of see like, like I'm made in God's image and likeness. God has given me everything. I owe him everything, right? I owe him my whole life, that I need to make my life a gift back to God in thanksgiving. Yeah. Right. And that Christ is the image and my life is a conforming to that image, right? Not trying to pass off this phony image that everybody should love and everybody should worship, right?
I think that's also why, like, when the Bible talks about God humbles the pride or humbles the proud, it's not just for his sake, yeah. But it's also sometimes this is how we have to be saved. Correct. Is we have to be humbled. I always found it interesting when the Bible says that Moses was the most humble man in all the lands, and then you're like, oh wow. And then you're like, wait a minute. Moses wrote that. So, all right. Yeah. So the next one then is going to be envy. Like envy, when we're envious of other people, how can this really... We understand how pride can keep us away from God, keep our guards up, don't allow God to reach into us and walk us and make us turn away from God. How can envy lead us into death?
Well, envy, so a lot of people confuse envy and jealousy. Jealousy isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think St. Paul talks about how that you want people to be jealous of the Christian and the Christian love, right? You can be jealous of a good quality in somebody that you want, or that you admire, and there's this admiration there, and you could go after that. That's not necessarily a bad thing. envy is like this. Nick gets all this publicity with his podcast as this great theologian, and I just, I can't. I should be the great theologian, right? Like
Can envy
I
also
want
be
that.
like, you not only want it.
Well, so I'm getting there, yeah. So I want that, and I want Nikki to be teared down for it. Like I delight in when the misfortunes happen to Nick. I delight in that. So there's this envy that like I hate you, like it because of what you have that I want, that I deserve more than you, right? And then I want you, like I want bad things to happen to you because you have something that I don't have.
Now, is this why, like, you came on my podcast and when I was like, Joe, what do you think about Jesus on a certain mountain? You're like, I didn't know we were going to talk about God. I thought we were talking about Ohio State Notre Dame game. Like, I hope I'm going to tank this podcast. I'm going to tank it.
Yeah.
So, if envy, which you can see, like, it could start off with jealousy. Not only like I want to aspire to that, but now, yes.
But I deserve that more than you deserve.
Look at this guy. Look how hot, women do this, right? Like, look how she looks. Look how she looks. Or we can do it like, oh, I don't need a nice truck like that. I'm happy with my bicycle. And, where it's actually can be something that you not only want what they have, you want them to be destroyed. It battles. It grows in hatred. You could see how this starts to harden your heart.
Well, so there's like Bishop Barron does a real nice analysis of the deadly sins. If anybody wants to look at that, you should look at that. He does a really, really good job. But he uses a movie called Amadeus. And Amadeus
I just watched that. With Mozart?
With Mozart, yeah. So Salieri...
Yes.
So Salieri, he is this composer, but he's kind of just an average composer. And Mozart comes in, and he's this cocky guy, and he's just like everybody loves him, and he's just he's like making like alterations to Salieri's work, and he's like, oh, that's not right, After
hearing it just one time,
just exactly. And Salieri just despises him because Salieri thinks he wants everybody to love him as this great composer, but he's just this average composer. And so Mozart comes in, and he's the image of the thing that Salieri wants to be, right? But Salieri can't. He just doesn't have the ability to be that. He's just not that. So we have Salieri's pride, right? This image of himself, this fake image that he wants to portray, that he wants everybody to love and admonish, right? And then we have this lead to this growing festering of his envy towards Mozart, right?
Right.
And then eventually what this leads to is Salieri, spoiler alert, wants to kill Mozart, right? So there's this trickling down of these deadly sins that are festering in the individual.
And Mozart never has... the faintest idea.
Correct.
That Salieri is that he honestly feels that he is such a good friend. Mm-hmm. But it's just, you can see this.
Yeah, and if memory serves me correct, he has like Mozart write this piece in secret that he wants to, I think he's going to kill Mozart and then pass this
for
piece.
His funeral.
Yeah, and pass this piece off as like this, like, and then everybody will like just clap
like
for
they
Salieri.
Did it together.
Yeah.
And that you really see how this envy just took him over to where you can see, when you watch the movie, you can see how it affects Salieri's relationship with God, even how he prays.
Yeah.
He feels that God betrayed him.
Yeah.
And you could see how this envy, and you kind of wonder like how people were taught like their prayer life. It's no different than you watch the third Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And what's his name from that 70s show? What's that kid's name? Remember he played Venom.
Yeah. I know who you're talking about, but I don't know. Not Tobey Maguire. I forget.
But anyways, remember, like, he goes into church and he's praying in front of a crucifix. Please kill Spider-Man. I'm like, what catechesis did this guy get?
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't work. You don't go in and just ask Jesus to kill some guy you don't like. All right, so we see not only with pride and its counterpart of humility, and then envy has the counterpart of then kindness. Kindness of just treating other people good for their benefit, taking yourself out of view and putting the attention on somebody else. And
or the sense of admiration for the other person, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, like that I admire you, that I'm not, worried about you getting more glory than me. Right.
To where even the point where, like, you can be supportive of them and then bring about even more greatness. Okay, so then we have the sin of gluttony, which obviously this can include not just alcohol or sex, but it can include food, it can include Facebook, it can include any social media, TV at all, where we just
consumerism.
Yeah. We don't own some of this stuff. It owns us. We're consumed with it. We become addicted to this stuff. How would that affect your relationship with God?
Well, look, you think of all the pagan gods. They all kind of represented a created good, right?
Yeah.
And I think that it's we have idols, and in this day and age, I think many people do idol worship. They just don't set up, altars for it. They're consumed with, their lives, goods, products that they could buy, TV shows, whatever is basically mainstream culture. Now, what's kind of interesting is this consumption of things, right? Even whether it's work, right? You look at like when Moses comes to Pharaoh, his initial request is to take his people out for 3 days to worship. That's his initial request, right? And Pharaoh's like, you know what? Maybe they're not busy enough. I'm going to give them more work to do, right? I'm just like this constant consuming of information, consuming of work, consuming of entertainment, consuming of food, consuming of sex, you name it. Like, we're just filling this void of God with the material things. That really, it should be the place for God in our lives. And so I think that it's a huge danger, I think, this day and age, that people just don't even pay attention to, like the pitfalls of this consumerist mentality. I think most people think of gluttony. They just really simply, they think of like food and drink. And no, it can apply to all manifestations in your life, especially technology, your phones, internet. When you're devoting all of your time, and like, I get it, it's a hard thing. It's one thing that I struggle with at times.
Especially since this podcast came out.
Correct.
Can't get enough of it.
But yeah, so it's just it's something to easily fall into, right?
So we obviously see the antidote to this is abstinence. Mm-hmm. And so whether it's fasting from food, sexual abstinence, or just, the church still teaches us on every Friday during the year to fast, to practice some sort of absence, which, still meat is the traditional
primary. So the USCCB said you're no longer under pain of sin. I think they released their letter on fasting back in the 60s. But if you look at the Code of Canon Law, I think it's like 1254, somewhere around there. You know, if you go around there, you should be
somewhere in the back.
You know, they still say that the fasting from meat is part of canon law, according to the Episcopate, according to the bishops that you fall under, right? So it gives them the flexibility. But like fasting from meat, typically we would say is you know, probably the primary way of fasting. Now, what the bishops in the U.S. wanted you to do is you choose a way of doing penance. You know, could be charity work, could be going to soup kitchens, things like that. They gave you kind of flexibility to do it, you know, but we still are called to fast. It's not, I think that, you know, it should be something that is done more than just in Lent, you know, and it's an important thing to kind of keep created goods in check. You know, it's how do I have this virtue of temperance and moderation that I need, this cardinal virtue, you know, and I think that fasting plays a huge part in that.
And really, especially fasting, you know, it should be something that you really also look for something that you struggle with. Like, what are you a glutton of? And, you know, really try to fast for that. So it's easy for me because people always told me I was a glutton for punishment. So on Fridays, no punishment.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got 4 more. Get through them quickly. So obviously lust is a big one. Lust can begin in your heart, and you'll notice how these sins can merge together. You know, like when these 7 sins combine, they form me captain or capital sin.
Capital sin.
And
then there's a heart.
Yeah.
Like it was the worst ring.
Yeah. So with lust, you could see, okay, you know somebody, they got a pretty wife. You could see how lusting, envy, gluttony, not being able to control yourself, you could see how these things could really merge, and you can allow these to grow. Mm-hmm. You could be spreading rumors about that person with envy to try to crush their marriage, making your way in there to where all of a sudden you realize you're engaging in this terrible sin that is really could be, you know, really a mortal sin that is really cutting off the life from you. Because this mortal sin is the biblical term, and it literally means sin that leads to death. You know, you have to be alive.
Yeah.
You have to have life in order for it to go to death. So this is not just sins of people who are already dead in Christ. This is people who are allowing themselves to walk back into darkness. So if lust is this dangerous sin that we could enter into and grow into, and then allow this to work from our heart to where it eventually expresses itself from us, then the cure for this is going to be chastity. Yeah. Which does not just mean celibacy. I think people get this confused.
No, with even a marriage, you should practice chastity. Pope John Paul II, I don't remember exactly the time period in his pontificate, but he got some heat from some people. But I mean, I'm not saying he's wrong. I think he's right, but that it's possible to lust after your own wife, right, within the confines of a marriage, right? So, look, we live in a culture of consumerism. We live in a culture of sex, and we live in a culture that, you know, kind of objectifies the human person. And whenever you're kind of, you know, Father Larry Richards, I always liked the way he explained lust, you know, because some people think that, okay, well, if I just think, like, there's an attractive girl going on over there, you know, walking, and I go, oh, she's a pretty girl. Like, you know, I've heard Christians say it, and I don't agree with them, that just saying she's a pretty girl is like you're thinking, you're lusting in your heart. I don't agree with that at all. Lusting is a willful participation in these kinds of thoughts. It's like you see a bird fly by, you can say that's a pretty bird. But the moment that bird, you see that bird and you let that bird kind of nest in your head, right? And in your heart, and you start thinking of all the things that you can do with the bird.
You're a sicko.
You're a sick individual, you know?
Pretty bird.
Pretty bird.
Pretty bird.
You, Petey?
Polly want a cracker?
I took care of it. So I think that's it. Like, you know, when you willfully allow yourself to participate and what we're talking about here, now you're in the realm of lust. You know?
Yeah.
So,
because even Matt Fradd had an interesting talk with PragerU.
Oh yeah, and they did. Yeah.
And one of the things he talked about, like when it comes to like lusting after your own wife, like, you know, I have a beautiful wife. The idea is like, what is, you know, somebody could be like, what do you mean you can't lust after your own wife? Like, you can't find her attractive, you can't find her beautiful,
No.
You can't be engaged by her. It's not that. It's the idea of like you're viewing her as an
object for my own like satisfaction.
Yeah, basically an object to which you satisfy your needs, and you do not view her as a person, and you take the idea of the relationship and love out of the marital act.
Correct.
So, you know, can't go too deep because my mom listens to this podcast. So,
Ducky.
So yeah. So next we have wrath, and not just the wrath of Khan.
I was literally thinking that.
But we have wrath.
Is that the best Star Trek, Wrath of Khan?
I was never a really huge Star Trek person.
Yeah.
I gotta get into it.
Well, like Seinfeld, they say Wrath of Khan was the best.
Well, I'll take their word for it.
Yeah.
So wrath is this idea of like, yeah, it could be tied to like your anger. It could be tied to, you know, you get so upset, like, shut the kids up. You know, I'm trying to sleep, or, you know, why is the neighbor doing this? Who cuts their lawn at 1 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon?
Yeah.
So this wrath that is losing control over your emotions, and the more you engage with wrath, the more wrath wants to come out. The more you feed these vices, the more they want to come out. So the antidote to wrath would be patience. And it's this idea of like, yeah, okay, he'll be done cutting the grass pretty soon. Kids, could you quiet down, please? Daddy's trying to sleep. You know, instead of just flipping out.
Yeah. And what I mean, it's exactly. One thing I tell people that I give a kind of an advice to is it's not mine. It's my idea. No, it's the Catholic notion of offering it up. You know, and I always think that this is a perfect one for wrath. You know, like, you know, so, you know, you want to flip out on somebody, right? And typically your wrath comes out of a place, I think, you know, I'm sure it comes out of more than one place, but maybe one avenue that wrath comes from is this fact that, you know, somebody like don't you understand that I need to get to work? Why are you making me late? It comes from this place where like you're frustrated that other people aren't doing what you want. You know, I think in a lot of times that happens with wrath. And I feel like offering up is this idea of, you know, when I want to flip out, like I take a minute and I say, you know what? I'm going to be patient. You know, I'm going to endure this frustration in patience for the love of somebody else, you know? So, and I think what happens is when you do that, I think at times, you stop thinking of yourself and you start thinking of somebody else. And I think in a lot of ways that sometimes dissipates that, you know?
I think it's a key thing to, like you said, you got to do something with that wrath. You can't just bottle it up. You've got to offer it up, or you have to practice patience with understanding. Not just the patience to where you're like, but patience to where you're like, well, why did they do this? wide. So you're not just like, serenity now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Remember, George, serenity now.
Yeah.
Insanity later.
Correct. Yeah. But I think for me that always was a good starting point. Not that I'm perfect at it, but sometimes like when I am getting like starting, because usually it's like a ticking time bomb. The serenity now thing, it's there, and there's things that you're getting frustrated with, and so I think and say in this scenario, I mean, maybe if we look at it from one angle, in this scenario, the person I'm getting frustrated with is my enemy, right? And yet we are called to love our enemies. And how do we love our enemies? We pray for them,
Yeah. Praying for somebody really is an antidote in itself. One quick thing, because I want to move on, because we're running out of time, but there was one time I went out to eat with pretty famous, Catholic guy, and a couple of his buddies went out to eat at a restaurant. And the guy was like, it was during Lent, and the guy was like, I'll have she goes, the waitress was like, what do you want to drink? And he was like, I'll have just a seltzer water. And she's like, do you want any flavored seltzer water or anything? And he was like, no, it's Lent. She goes, so you don't want any flavors? He's like, no, just plain. And his buddy was like, dude, just offer it up. I'm like, yeah, I don't think this is like the wrath we're supposed to be like, we're fighting against him. Like,
yeah.
Maybe you just keep being a little bit of a baby.
Yeah.
But so next thing we have is Scrooge McDuck and greed, right? So greed is something that can really lead us into a hardness of heart, because that's really what mortal sin is, right? It's basically because a heart of flesh is the key to salvation. Heart of stone is the key to death. I mean, so this is really what this is all about, is hardening the heart. This is what we're trying to fight against. So greed, how can greed really harden our heart, would you say?
Well, I think a good image, which you mentioned before, was like the ring. The ring represents power.
Yeah,
right?
Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. And you look at Gollum. Gollum was like a normal dude. But when you look at Gollum in the movie, he looks like this grotesque figure, He's kind of like not easy to look at. I think there's a reason to depict him in such a manner, is because when you wear sin long enough, now the ring represents sin, right? But the ring also represents power. And when you wear sin long enough, it changes you, right?
Yeah.
And like there's this level of like, my precious, I have to have it. I can't let go of it. I want it. It's mine. And this struggle with that, I think is many people kind of suffer from, the ability to like let go of their stuff, and I think you can't have two masters, right?
Yeah.
You can't serve God and mammon, right? So,
and this brings you to the understanding of like being able to give away liberally, this liberality. Like and this would be the antidote to this.
Yeah. Well, and like
greed.
for sure. Like so, tithing for sure is a good remedy to that, right? If God's not God of your money, then He's God of nothing in your life, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about money, it's like, look at Christ preaches against money. Socrates preaches against money. I mean, there's this idea that they know that there's something about money that when you get it, like it's like, oh, this is kind of nice, and you want more of it. There's an easy natural turn to like, I want more money, right? But when you're not like trapped by that, when money is not in charge of your life, then you you can how to do with money. And this is like when we if you get into like philosophy a little bit, the idea like of the importance of seeking virtue and being having your soul like rightly ordered, right? Because especially with money, I think there's a line in the Apology: wealth doesn't bring about excellence, which is virtue, is what they're talking about. Wealth doesn't bring about excellence, but excellence brings about wealth and every other good for man. That if you put first things first, if you have the things that should be first in your life, right? God, right? Being a just person, right? Living the virtuous life, right? When you encounter such things, when money comes to you, you will know how to handle it. The person that is a viceful person, it's going to be it's going to be a damnation to him, a curse to him. Yeah, is maybe the better way to say it.
That's why so many people win the lottery.
Yeah,
they end up going, crazy. Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. Okay, the last one then is sloth. Sloth. Sloth is from Goonies.
Sloth.
Hey, you
guys. Yeah. Sloth doesn't make me think of the animal sloth, right? Yeah. Sloth, what they call it, like an old phrase called the noonday devil, I think. It's the way, I don't know if you ever heard that.
No.
But it's this spiritual dryness, right? The spiritual dryness that, like, I don't get anything out of reading the Bible,
It's like a lazy spirituality.
Yeah.
Right?
Correct, yeah.
I don't get anything out of the reading the Bible because I don't read the Bible.
Yeah. What? And if you read it, like, it's just like, it's just...
I didn't get anything out of the sermon. Did you sit all the way in the back? No, I sat in the bathroom the whole time.
Yeah.
I didn't get anything out of it.
Yeah.
You got to put into the faith.
A zeal.
To get out.
Yeah. A zeal for the mission. Right.
So, in other words, for zeal is like diligence. This idea of like, do what you got to do. Let's.
Yeah.
Because there's a difference between wanting God and choosing God. Okay? So, like, you want to go to the gym, get in shape. I want to go to the gym, get in shape. We don't choose to go into the gym. That's the only aspect of my theology where I am a Calvinist. I'm like, listen, I was just not predestined to have a six-pack. Yeah. Do you want me to try to fight against the sovereignty of God? If God wants me to live to the healthy age of 45, then that's just the way it is. I'm a Calvinist when it comes to that.
Yeah.
But no, so it's the idea of like, we got to put in the work, right?
Yeah.
For it.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't know. Yeah. What's the point of what you're doing? I think you got to, I've talked to my students about like starting your day off with morning prayer, having like a, what's the most important thing for a company is having like a mission statement. Having a mission, there is a mission that Christ is calling you towards, and having that everyday purpose of understanding that the faith is who you are, not something you do, and trying to bring it into your life that it's everything. It kind of like is the beginning and end of your day. It's kind of the rhythm of your life. And there's a point to what you're doing, and it's just not, it's not just something you do, but it's something, it's who you are.
It's who you are.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on the show, man. So we went through the 7 deadly sins of pride, envy, gluttony, lust, wrath, greed, sloth. Mm-hmm. And their counterparts, their antidotes, which would be humility, kindness, abstinence, chastity, patience, liberality, and diligence. So with that, I want to thank my buddy Joe for coming back on the show. And Joe, just got one question. If you and I were fishing and one of us found a shiny ring, would you try to kill me for it?
No.
No?
No.
You don't see, you can't tell yet.
Yeah.
So you have it.
Hold on. So this is what I say. If you ask, what's your superpower? You ask anybody what their superpower is. If they say that, or you could do, have any superpower you want. If they say that they would pick invisibility, don't be friends with them.
Yeah.
No, you can't trust them.
Yeah, honestly. It's just a creepo, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to be.
Well, you ask anybody, if you had a ring that could turn you invisible for a day, you could do whatever you want. Everybody. I mean, many people would just do very unjust things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. I don't know. It's messed up to even think about that.
Yeah.
You and your bird twisted stuff.
Yeah. It's true. It's a ring of Gyges. Yeah. Plato's Republic.
All right, guys. Well, thank you guys for watching this. Thanks, Joe, for coming on. I promised them this one would be under 20 minutes. So next time we're going to cover lies.
Liar.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Good night, kids. Daddy loves you.
That's what you get for making me change your garbage disposal for you.